Hi there. Please allow me to introduce myself to you. My name is Cath Baxter, and I am a professional voice and impact coach. And I'd like to welcome you to this online training session, which is top tips for acing the interview. What I'd like to start with is I'd like to start with a quote from the Pulitzer Prize winning poet, William Carlos Williams. And he said, "It's not what you say that matters, but it's the manner in which you say it. Therein lies the secret of the ages." Now, how does that quote connect to an interview situation? Well, over the course of my career, 18 years as a voice coach, I have interviewed thousands of people. I've also coached hundreds of people for promotional interviews. And over the last 5 years of my career that I've been working with the Women into Leadership Conference, I've been going up and down the country, enabling people to have the skills to lead and to promote themselves at interview. But here's what I've learned about interview situations, and I hope that this will carry resonance with you, is that when you go into an interview, really all that can actually be assessed is not whether or not you've got the skills to do the job. It's whether you sound like you can do the job and whether you look like you can do the job. And it's about 3 months later before anyone discovers whether you can actually do the job. And every day I work with individuals who are really skilled at what it is that they do, but are not necessarily aware of how to present that in a formal situation, how to articulate their skills, how to vocalize their skills. And that's what I want to share with you in this session. I want to share with you how you can effectively utilize your voice and your body in order to ace the interview. So what are we going to be looking in this training session? We're going to look at 5 deliberate actions that you can take that will help you to ace the interview. Now, the first deliberate action that you're going to take is connected to this quote. And this is Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin said, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." And this is one of my favorite quotations because it's all about situations where you're going to experience adrenaline. And that's what an interview induces. It induces nerves or adrenaline. And there are only 2 solutions to being able to manage adrenaline. And those are preparation. And then secondly, it's technique that you actually apply on the day. And we're going to look at 2 of those things, those 2 areas, preparation and technique, in this training session today. So who is this Scottish woman who's having a chat with you this afternoon? Well, as I said, my name's Cath Baxter, and I've been a voice coach now for 18 years. And for the last 10 years of my career, I've been working in business, and I've been supporting individuals to be able to empower themselves in situations where they experience adrenaline, how to be able to utilize their voice and their body in order to effectively influence. And I've helped hundreds of people achieve their career ambitions to be able to promote themselves effectively at the point at which they need to influence. And I'm really delighted to share some of that work with you this afternoon. So let's have a little look at the first deliberate action to take if you want to ace that interview. Deliberate action number 1 is to do your research. It's so important, if you're going to land that job effectively, that you do your research. But don't think about yourself. Think about the other person. Think about the person who's going to be interviewing you. What's going to make that person go, "Ooh, that's really interesting. Ooh, Who is this person? So in your research, you're looking for ways that you can establish rapport, that you can establish connection in that interview. So look, for example, at the organization that you're interviewing for. What connections do you have with that organization? Then perhaps look at the person who's interviewing you. Do a bit of background research on them. Is there anything that connects the two of you? Reflect on your own personal experiences or your own professional experiences. What do you think you can bring to the role? And what's going to make that interviewer see you as unique? Because if you do your research, you're much more likely to stand out from the crowd because you've taken time to recognize what you and the organization that you are working towards have in common. And where there is common ground, often we can find ourselves in a position that we're far more likely to get that job. So the first deliberate action is to ensure that you've done some adequate research. Let's have a little look now at our next deliberate action. And our next deliberate action is to identify the key questions and to then practice verbal drafts of those questions. And so it's so important that you identify the key questions that you think that you're going to be asked to interview. But many of us do that already. But how can you enhance it? How can you amplify it? Because often people will write down a list of questions and then they'll write down their responses. But we don't write as we speak. And so if you try and verbalize the points that you've made on the paper, what they may come across at the interview is stilted, or it will sound like it isn't fluid, or maybe it will sound overly formal or rehearsed. Whereas if you do verbal drafts of your answers, you will begin to find more fluidity in how you answer that question. You will enable yourself to be more clear and more succinct potentially in how you answered that question. And so once you've identified the key questions, once you've maybe identified 2 or 3 key points that you're going to put in response to those questions, verbalize. Don't do written drafts of your answers, do verbal drafts instead. I can assure you, the first verbal draft will be terrible, and so will the second. But the third will be better, and the fourth and the fifth will be even better, and likely the sixth will sound amazing. And that's the kind of practice you want to do before you go into the room. But if you're doing an online interview, or in 6 months' time, post-pandemic, fingers crossed, you do a face-to-face interview, how can you effectively put across your message? Now, the most effective way to physicalize and to make your point is to stand as you deliver your messages. That's why people stand up when they publicly speak, because their voice and their body works most optimally for them. But at an interview, you're still looking to create impact. But everybody knows that interviews are conducted when you're sitting. So immediately, your physical impact is diminished. So how can you increase your physical impact? How can you look like somebody who's going to be proactive in their role, who's going to be energized in this new job, who's going to be passionate and excited about the role that is on offer? Well, it's all connected to where you sit in your chair. And so the next deliberate action that I'm going to ask you to take is a deliberate action to take when you walk into the interview room or just before you switch the camera on. And that is to sit on the edge of your seat. Because when you sit on the edge of your seat, your posture is more energized. Your breathing becomes more efficient. And if your breathing is more efficient, you're able to concentrate, and your vocal and your physical impact is increased. Let me demonstrate. I'm now sitting on the edge of my seat. I'm now going to move to the back of my seat. And now you can see literally how far forwards in my chair I've been sitting in this presentation thus far. And that's because it was really important and still is to get my message across. But let me explain to you what's happened now that I'm sitting back in my chair. My feet are no longer fully touching the floor. I've pulled my feet in underneath the chair. So now only the tips of my toes are touching the ground. As I'm sat back in the chair, the upper torso has now collapsed into my pelvis, and my abdominal wall has become tight. As a result, my belly can't expand as I'm breathing in, and so my breath becomes more shallow. As I'm pushing back now into the chair, my back ribs have become restricted by the back of the chair. And it's now around about 50% harder for me to communicate with you. And so the most optimal place to sit is at the edge of the seat. And so instead of bringing your chair in towards the device or towards the table in front of you, practice pushing your chair away from the table or away from the device, but bring yourself to the edge of the seat. When you bring yourself to the edge of your seat, your upper torso becomes much more engaged. Your back ribs are able to open, your abdominal wall is able to move, and your feet are able to connect with the floor. So at the point at which you're experiencing adrenaline, you're able to breathe more effectively. You're able to inspire yourself more effectively. And you're able to feel more grounded as you communicate your messages. Let's now look at our next deliberate action. And that is all around handling questions. And in terms of handling questions, my best advice is to check that you're not holding your breath and that you listen and you actively breathe. Now, here's why. You're going to be experiencing adrenaline when you go into that interview situation. And one of the ways that your body responds to adrenaline is to hold the breath. And that's because your old brain, the one that used to be afraid of dinosaurs and tigers, is on alert. Your nervous system is on alert. And your old brain is going alert, alert, alert. And it holds its breath to create pressure in your rib cage in order to help you to run away from the perceived danger or to fight the perceived danger. But there are no tigers in the room. There's just somebody asking you questions. And so one of the key things that you've got to do is at the point at which you're being interviewed is to catch that behavior. Catch yourself holding your breath and tell yourself to actively breathe. And that means perhaps breathing in the question and breathing out the question. And then crucially, challenge yourself to listen to the question. Because what most of us do is we start trying to answer the question in our head before the interviewer has finished asking us the question. And the real problem with that is that the interviewer makes their point at the end of the sentence. So if we're already trying to answer the question in our head before the interviewer has finished asking that question, you could miss a crucial bit of detail. So challenge yourself. Go into that interview, sit on the edge of your seat, and then commit yourself to actively breathing and really listening to the question. And then you're going to be in the best position to begin to answer that question. So what do you do next? Well, then you've got to actually answer the question. And then I feel that this quote by Thomas Jefferson is really relevant. And Thomas Jefferson, the American president, said that the most valuable of all talents is that of never using two words when one will do. Don't you want to be the person at that interview who's able to be succinct, who's not going to waffle? Isn't that our fear, that we start spouting hot air because we're not sure about what to say, because we haven't given ourselves enough time? And so how can you be more succinct? How can you say less words to create more impact? Well, the key is to pause, to think, and then to declutter your answer. Now, how do you actually do this? What is a pause? Well, a pause is a moment of silence. And right the way through this training session, I've been employing pauses. And I've been employing pauses to give me time to think about what I need to say next. But I've also been employing pauses instead of making other sounds that are less useful, like or or ooh, or words that again are not particularly useful, filler words like so or right or okay. Instead, what I do is I take a pause. And when you pause, you give yourself time to think. And if you give yourself time to think, you can challenge yourself and say, how few words can I use to answer this question? Literally declutter your answer. Now, you're not going to be able to achieve this in the interview unless you practice before. So when you're putting together your verbal drafts of your answers, also practice pausing and allowing that silence to be there. It only needs to be 2 seconds. And then think, what do you want to say? And then commit to using as few words as possible in order to answer the question. Let's now review those 5 deliberate actions for acing the interview. Deliberate action number 1, do your research, asking yourself, how can you establish rapport? How can you connect with the person who is interviewing you or the organization who is interviewing you? Deliberate action number 2, before you go into the room, practice verbal drafts of your answers. Deliberate action number 3, when you get into the room or before you turn your camera on, make sure you're sat at the edge of your seat. And think about the associations we have with the term edge of the seat. It's a place of excitement. And instead of getting nervous about the interview, get excited instead. It's a real opportunity here, a real opportunity for you to share your work and your practice. And if you've done great preparation, you should feel excited. And the best place to feel that is on the edge of your seat. Handle questions by listening and actively breathing. Avoid trying to answer that question in your head first. Take some time to really listen and particularly pay attention to the end of the sentence. Pause, think, and declutter your answer. How few words can you use in order to be able to answer the question? Thank you for viewing this training session this afternoon. If you found value in the work that I've shared with you, feel free to send me some love on Twitter. I'm out there at @ProVoiceCoach, or you can connect with me via LinkedIn at Cath Baxter. Or if you want to find out more information about the services that I offer, you can contact me at www.cathbaxter.co.uk.